Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. This is the second to last lecture. We are going over the Mesozoic, aka the age of dinosaurs today. I've had students take my class who the entire reason why they took the class was for this lecture because all they wanted to know about was dinosaurs. So if that's why you took the class, I'm glad you're here. I've spent quite a lot of time studying dinosaurs one way or another. I've worked in dinosaur museums. I've dug up dinosaur bones. I've shown you some of the bones that I've dug up. They're really fun. Whenever anyone talks about paleontology, everyone automatically starts thinking about dinosaurs, which is a little unfair to the rest of paleontology. But dinosaurs are by far the, I guess I could say, the sexiest topic in paleontology. Everyone loves talking about dinosaurs. But before we go into that, recall that there is exactly 1 week left in the semester from this point forward for those of you that are taking this class synchronously and asynchronously at the moment. If you're watching this recording during a future class, obviously these dates don't necessarily apply to you, but the timeline probably will, where there is one more lecture after today and then a final exam review. So please use this last week to catch up if you have not already. Yes, sir.
What about the final lab?
The lab exam?
Yeah.
The lab exam will open on Tuesday, the next time we meet.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll get that last lecture, and in that last lecture will be the last little pieces of information you need for the lab exam. And then I will open the lab exam, and you'll have until Thursday to take it. And then on Thursday, we will meet and have our final exam review. If you can't make it here that day for any particular reason, I completely understand that. I will still have a final exam review here in this classroom, whether there are people in this classroom with me or not. But remember, the reviews are based entirely upon your questions. So if you have questions that you want answered, either be here to ask them or send me an email before the end of Wednesday night, okay? So that 1 week from today, I can walk into this classroom, pop open my email, see the questions, and answer them there. All right, answer them on the recording, I should say. But if you don't ask me your questions, there won't be a review. Cool? Any other questions for me? The lab exam and the final exam are the only assignments that have not been given to you yet. Everything else you should have already done, ideally. With the exception of lab 5. It's understandable if you haven't finished that yet because you haven't gotten all the information about filling out that chart at the end, right? You're getting that today and next time we meet. All right. We good? Shall we begin?
Yep.
All right. What happened at the end of the Permian? A mass extinction. Not only a mass extinction, but what? Huh? I mean, yes, there was a period of cooling for sure, but why was this extinction unique?
Because it killed 70% of the population.
It was the largest extinction that ever has occurred on our planet that we know of. Yeah. Yeah, so this tends to be confusing. More species survived than you would think, but there were fewer representatives of those species, right? So instead of saying 90% of all species die, but only 50% of everything alive, right? That doesn't real math for that doesn't really work out. So saying 30% of all species survived, but 90% of everything died, that's more how it goes. So the statistics can be a little confusing. But the point is, quantitatively, of all individuals alive, only 5% of things in the ocean, and about 30% of everything on on land survived. The ocean was a little affected far more. Why is that? From what you've learned in our classes, why would the ocean be so hard hit? Perhaps it has something to do with oxygen, but in what way? I'm not talking about what caused the change. Huh?
The sun?
Not really the sun. What are ways that you can think of? If I was a supervillain and I really wanted to kill as many things in the ocean as fast as I could, what would I do? I could heat it up. I could change the salinity. Or other ways affect the chemistry, make it a little more acidic, right? Yeah, all these animals that live in the ocean are very sensitive to the conditions that they live in, right? Imagine our atmosphere gets its chemistry changed. If our atmosphere got just a little bit of chlorine gas in it, that wouldn't be very good for you and me, would it? So if I put other chemicals in the ocean, like increase the acidity of the ocean, that's not good for the things that live in the ocean, right? That's what they live in, just like we live in atmosphere. So yeah, they're very sensitive to these little minute changes. I increase the temperature of the ocean by 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and I kill off 40 to 50% of everything in the ocean right now. Okay? The temperature and salinity and chemistry of the ocean is a delicate balance within which many organisms rely. Okay? Rely on that balance. I change that balance, things adapt or die, lots of things are going to die, you get an extinction. So at the end of the Permian, there was a change not only to the atmosphere, but also to the ocean, and that killed off a lot of stuff in the ocean. Very, very sensitive ecosystems. On land, things were a little more resilient. Okay, so only about 70% quantitatively of all of the organisms that were alive on land died. Now, there were some standouts that I'll talk about, some things that survived a little bit better than others. We'll talk about those in a minute. But what did we lose? Well, we lost our horn corals. We lost our tabulate corals and many of our bryozoans. We lost our trilobites. Did we lose our stromatolites? No. We still have those today. They did get hit pretty hard, but we still have living stromatolites in the oceans today. Restricted to those tidal flats we talked about before, but still there. They're the holdouts, right? So the Triassic began 252 million and ended 201 million years ago. With so few things surviving this extinction, if you were to take a stroll around a continent or take a swim through an early Triassic ocean, you would not see very many living things. There would not be a whole, at least not animals. Plants bounce back pretty quick, pretty well. But you wouldn't see a whole lot of animals everywhere, right? In particular in the oceans. You go swimming off the coast of Australia in the Great Barrier Reef right now, you're bumping into living things left, right, and center. It's a colorful cascade all around you. You go for a swim in the early Triassic, there's not a whole lot because it's all dead pretty much, okay? However, what did that open the doorway for? What happens after an extinction within the surviving organisms?
Adaptation.
An adaptation. We have a term for this rapid adaptation. When you get a whole bunch of new things coming in to fill all these niches.
A boom.
It's another term for a boom.
Mass speciation?
It is mass speciation, but that's not the word I'm looking for. The word that we use to describe this starts with an R. And it ends with adiation.
Radiation.
Radiation, good job. Okay, yes, this is a radiation, okay? Following an extinction, you'll often get this radiation, it's massive species diversification, okay? To fill new niches that are left vacant by what is now dead from the previous time. So what survived this extinction? Well, there are a few of those pelycosaur reptilian ancestors. Okay, we'll see what happens to them. We do have amphibians surviving, though many of the larger ones died off. We do still have ammonoids and nautiloids. They do make a comeback. Brachiopods, bivalves, we still have those. But they are very different than the ways we saw them all the way through the Permian. Why? Because they had the living space to change. When you have a packed apartment building like what we had at the end of the Permian, right before that extinction, the apartment building was packed. All the niches were occupied. Not a whole lot of space to branch out, to become something new, for a mutation to become positive in a way that encourages to move into a new environment, right? There wasn't a whole lot of room for that. You cut life off at the knees and you leave just a sliver of it left. The surviving things are going to change pretty drastically, all right? Our reef systems, no longer do we have those rugose corals and those tabulate corals. We see the development of ancestral hexacorals, which are going to be the ancestors of what we have today. Imagine now, during the Triassic, the development of reef systems that look very similar to what we have in the oceans now, okay? You can actually, most rock shops, most novelty stores will have hexacoral fossils like this that you can buy for like $1, because there's so many of these, okay? These dominate the ocean reef systems from this point forward. Our cephalopods start getting really big during the age of the dinosaurs, in particular ammonoids. I have seen ammonoid fossils that have been turned into dinner tables because they're so big. Yeah, like 7 to 8 feet across. Really, really big, yeah. One animal. Yep. This shape, right? 7 to 8 feet across. They're big. They got huge. You can actually find some pretty big ones here in Texas. The largest ones I found in Texas were about that big. I'm actually trying to find some places here pretty local. There's some places not far from here that if I got permission from the landowners, I may be able to take students in the future and we can go ammonite hunting for a field trip. Sorry, it's not something that I have together yet, so you all can appreciate it. It's something that takes time because you have to get permission from landowners, and then OC has to approve it, and I have to get an Odessa College bus. And then because so many of my students are minors, I have to do all of the disclaimers from your school and your parents, and there's just a whole thing, okay? I'm working that out. Hopefully, if not next year, the year after that, I can get something going. All right, so we have our ammonoids, our nautiloids, and belemnoids. And you remember what a belemnoid is?
Like the octopus that we're doing.
Well, these are all cephalopods, okay? So that the soft-bodied creatures that have the tentacle faces, right? Like an octopus is a cephalopod. A squid is a cephalopod. The difference is these ancestral cephalopods have shells, whereas cuttlefish, squid, octopi, they don't have hard shells. They're completely soft-bodied. But during this time, all these cephalopods, or at least the ones that we know of that we have fossils for, right? There may have been soft-bodied cephalopods, we just don't have fossils for them. They lived in shells, with the exception of the belemnoids. The belemnoids didn't live in a hard part. They contained a hard part in their bodies. Remember these? I showed you these when we talked about a lab in the past, right? Lab 3, I believe it was, right? These spikes are made out of aragonite calcite. And they would grow these in their bodies. So this was an interesting development. Not a hard shell on the outside to protect them, but a hard thing on the inside to provide weight distribution. This, as well as pockets of gases in their bodies, were determined where in the water column, how far from the surface or close to the bottom of the ocean they would be. You want to hunt near the surface of the ocean? You generate a few more gases in your body, and they were able to do this. They were able to fill chambers within their body with gases, right? Just like the chambers in the nautilus and the ammonite. And they would rise up closer to the surface. You want to sink? You let some of those gases out, and the weight of this spike pulls you back down through the water. Okay? Belemnoids. Our fish start looking like the fish that we have today. Our ray-finned fishes become very successful starting here on out. Okay? They get what we would consider to be scales. Okay? Overlapping armor plates, which were still a little thicker at this point than our modern day scaled fish are. We do still have some armored fish today, by the way. We do still. Sturgeon. If you guys have ever seen sturgeon. Yeah, they've got armor plates. They're pretty cool. They're actually also very aggressive and large. You don't want to get in a fight with a sturgeon, right? Gar. Gar are also very aggressive and have armor plates. But most fish have the scales that we know of today, and that configuration of scales, those overlapping scales, we see that show up here in the Triassic. Ray-finned fish, what does that mean? That means at the end of their hands, they've got very thin, delicate bones that go out like that with webbing between them, right? And that's what they use to swim, okay? The development of the swim bladder. How many of you have ever seen an old person take cod liver oil pills? Fish oil, cod liver oil. Yeah? It's great. It's full of omega-3 fatty acids. It's really good for you. Honestly, everyone should take them. It's very healthy. Okay? It helps with your brain, helps your immune system, helps a lot of things. Those oils come from the swim bladders of fish, generally cod, for those particular products. But they did the same thing that those spikes did, maybe kind of the opposite thing that those spikes did in belemnoids. Instead of simply needing to use muscle to push themselves up and down through the water like fish in the past did, now you have swim bladders, which provide buoyancy. Why would swim bladders full of oil provide buoyancy? Oil floats on water because it is
dense.
Less dense. It is buoyant because it is less dense than water. Therefore, oil floats on water. Boom, bada boom. You have an organ filled with oil in your fish. It's going to help your fish float, which allows more energy from this organism to go towards other things like being faster. Right? Remember that trend we saw in the Permian? Armored things were becoming less and less the dominant evolutionary arms race method, and speed was becoming more of a thing. We'll see that go back and forth in organisms over as time goes on, right? Okay. Now, what are our reptiles doing? Well, there was, early on in the Triassic, a big competitive moment. I say moment, it went for a while. But geologically speaking, it was more or less a moment in time, right? Perhaps 1 million or 2 years, or even a little bit longer than that, where reptiles, ancestral mammals, and amphibians were duking it out. Who's going to be top dog? Who's going to recover the fastest? Now, there was a particular animal that I'll get to here in a little bit that ended up becoming very successful and setting the stage for reptiles taking that lead. But in the ocean, our reptiles diversify into the ocean pretty quick. Okay? There's so much available living space, that free real estate in the ocean. Reptiles move back in. Remember, they left the ocean, right? Why? They developed that amniotic egg. They didn't need to lay their eggs in the water anymore, and so they can move inland. And now we see the opposite thing happening. Why? Because there's that free real estate in the ocean now. So they re-diversify back to living in ocean conditions. So when you think about it, it's kind of funny. They went fish to amphibian, amphibian to reptile, reptile, oh, we're going to go get our fish-like characteristics back and go back into the ocean. Okay? It's not a reversal of evolution, because these organisms that we see show up, which are reptiles that live in the ocean, they do not look like fish. They have some similar characteristics because they have to occupy similar niches. But evolution did not reverse itself. You understand the difference? Great. Okay. So, and by the way, I am not going to call these dinosaurs. First of all, dinosaurs haven't even shown up yet. We're not there. But also, to be considered a dinosaur, an organism has to have a few characteristics, one of which is it's a land organism. So those flying reptiles that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, not dinosaurs. The swimming ones, not dinosaurs. Flying reptiles and swimming reptiles, very different. Sharing common ancestors, but not dinosaurs. All right, we'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, so some of the varieties of swimming reptiles we see that show up in the Triassic. Placodonts, these guys, okay? Very large. Think of them as oversized iguanas, okay? Where they would live on land and just kind of hang out and hunt in the ocean. But have you ever seen iguanas just like hanging out on rocks on the coast? Like the pictures of the Galapagos Islands, or if you ever watched a National Geographic documentary, just a whole bunch of iguanas hanging out, and then every now and then one of them will like whoop, back out into the water because he wants a snack, right? Think of placodonts in that same sort of niche, but much bigger. Nothosaurs, very similar, but spent far more time in the water. They probably still slept on land, but they kind of fill the same niche that seals do today, okay? Where they're very sleek. Obviously, very hydrodynamic organisms. They curve and flow through the water, and it looks like, oh man, these are water animals. But then they just kind of hang out and sleep on land, right? They have their young on land, so on and so forth. Okay, nothosaurs kind of filled that niche. Plesiosaurs, these were fully aquatic reptiles. If you've ever seen, I have a picture, a terrifying picture actually of one of these that comes up later. But the very long-necked swimming reptile, have you ever seen those toys where it's got the 4 flippers and then the very long snake-like neck? That's a plesiosaur, okay? There's actually a really funny story about plesiosaurs. During the late 1700s and early 1800s, there was what is commonly referred to as a fossil war that happened in the United States, predominantly between 2 big paleontologists, Charles C. Marsh and Edward Cope. They were paleontologists that worked for competing museums, and they would lead expeditions out into the west of the United States, where it was known that a whole bunch of these fossils came from. And they would spend the entire summer finding as many fossils as possible, taking them back to the museums, and then spending the winter figuring out what they are, publishing them. It got so bad, the competition between these 2 paleontologists got so bad that if their parties, their expedition parties, passed each other in the field, they would shoot at each other. Yeah. Any opportunity they could to one-up the other, they would do it. And even to the point of public humiliation. So there's one story where I believe it was Cope, Edward Cope, had found the first plesiosaur skeleton. And he put it together, and he made this big old show. He had it set up in a tent. He invited all the museum investors to come over and look at it and be like, this is what your money has brought, give us more money so we can find more cool stuff like this. It was like the golden age of paleontology. People were throwing money at paleontologists. I was born in the wrong time, right? But he had made a mistake. He had put the skull on the end of the body with the least amount of vertebrae, naturally thinking that the tail would be longer than the neck. So he had the skull on this end, and he thought that was the tail. So he was in the middle of his presentation to these investors. They were oohing and aahing, and then Charles Marsh walks in. He doesn't say a word. He just walks over, picks the skull up off of this end, goes to the other end, puts the skull on that end, and walks out. And everyone goes, oh, that makes more sense. Yeah, that fits way better. And Edward Cope never forgave him. That was one of the things that made them bitter enemies. I love that story. It's a sad story because they used to be friends, but that was one of the things that kind of tipped the scale to the point where they started shooting at each other. Yeah, it's funny now that we're thinking about it 200 years later. Probably wouldn't have been terribly funny for either of them. Something that humiliating for someone, when you're asking like a dozen of, investors to give you tens of thousands more dollars, which would have been millions of dollars for them, right? If you consider inflation rates, right? You ask someone for $10,000 in the year 1800. That's like me asking someone for $50 million now, right? So, and then to be embarrassed like that in front of all those people, ooh, that would have been so humiliating. Anyways, okay, so that's plesiosaurs. Ichthyosaurs looked like that. Okay, this is a very basic, this is actually a drawing someone did in like the 70s of an ichthyosaur. I'll show you better pictures later. I think this one's funny because it looks like kind of like a bug-eyed dolphin almost, But also fully aquatic. However, here's the difference. The ichthyosaurs are very interesting because there is evidence to suggest that unlike other reptiles, they actually gave birth to live young. Why is that weird? Because reptiles lay eggs, don't they? Don't all reptiles lay eggs? Eh? I've got a little slithery friend that my buddy upstairs owns, little rosy boa, that would argue otherwise. Yeah, rosy boas and a few other boa species, they do give birth to live young, even though they are reptiles. And there are mammals that lay eggs. Monotremes, platypi, echidnas. They lay eggs, even though they are mammals. There are some exceptions to these rules, which itself is evidence of the fact of those common ancestors that we have, right? Reptiles that give birth to live young, mammals show up later that give birth to live young, sharing common genes. Reptiles that give birth to live young, or mammals that lay eggs, reptiles lay eggs, similar genes. Some things just didn't change. Some things didn't mutate away. Okay, so how do we know that they gave birth to live young? Well, this fossil right here is a pretty good indicator. That is a baby ichthyosaur mid-birth from a mother ichthyosaur when they both died and were buried in some event. Probably happened very quickly, whatever this event was. Maybe she came near to shore to give birth, and then there was an underwater landslide that buried them both based upon what the sediment's made out of. But yeah, evidence of live birth. Very cool, very interesting. And then, of course, turtles. The first turtles show up during the Triassic. And boy, they get big. The largest turtle skeleton I think I've ever heard of was about 12 feet long, 12-foot long shell. There may have been bigger ones. I am unaware of them, though. That's the largest I've heard of. All right, our plants. Those lycopod trees are still very common in the tropics. We have those huge gymnosperm forests up in the north and southern latitudes and high up in elevation. Okay, big forests are recovering from this extinction event. The conifers, the ginkgos, the cycads, these form the bottom of the food chain for the herbivorous organisms that we're about to see show up, okay? Those dinosaurs. Their main food source for most of the time that dinosaurs were on this planet were cycads and ginkgos and gymnosperms, okay? Conifers specifically. Okay. Now, I mentioned to you before that there was one organism that ended up being very successful on land that kind of set the stage for where evolution was going to go, what was going to be favored. Okay. Most of the therapsids, which remember were the ancestors to both reptiles and, or to both dinosaurs and mammals, most of them died out. But there was one little dude that ended up being very successful. Lystrosaurus, this guy. Now, don't be deceived. They look like giant monsters in this picture because it looks like, oh, it just ripped that tree out of the ground and it's eating it. It's Godzilla. No, these are tiny little, like, this is actually the size of what these plants would have been. Okay? This is actually about the size of what these guys would have been. Think little, like, pig dogs, right? They were actually about that big. They look kind of cute, don't they? But, I mean, those giant teeth are a little intimidating, but we think they just use those to kind of dig through the ground looking for roots and tubers and stuff like that. They were herbivorous. They did not eat any meat. Those giant teeth were not for killing. Okay? They were simply for tearing up the ground. This is Lystrosaurus, and there are Lystrosaurus skeletons on every continent. Because at the end of the Permian, when there was this giant extinction, Lystrosaurus, wherever they were, I couldn't tell you where they were living at the time, they survived that extinction for one reason or another, or multiple reasons, and they adapted so quickly that they spread over every inch of Pangaea, which was still around at this time. Pangaea starts to break apart here in a little bit, but before it does, Lystrosaurus go everywhere. We have fossils of them all over the continents. And because they were so successful, and they went everywhere, filling all these niches, diversifying eventually, we go from having just this one species of Lystrosaurus to having multiple species, to having completely different families come out of this one group. Okay, Lystrosaurus went everywhere and changed into a whole bunch of different organisms as time went on. Okay, mammals and dinosaurs came from this group, and they started to compete with each other. But in the end, reptiles won. Why did reptiles have an advantage? Well, they were able to specialize faster. They got sharper, better teeth faster than mammals. They got bigger faster than mammals. They were faster than mammals. Many reasons why, after only a short period of time there at the beginning of the Triassic, reptiles, namely the dinosaur group of reptiles, took the stage, and mammals, for their own survival, had to stay small and out of the way. So from this point forward, from the Triassic all the way up to the end of the dinosaurs, we do not see any big mammals because they lost that fight. We do not see any flying mammals. We barely see any mammals that we think were even out at day. Most of them were nocturnal to stay safe from dinosaurs that were out during the day. They were small, unobtrusive, stayed out of the way, and that ended up working in our favor in the end. Okay? However, while the mammals lost that fight and stayed out of the way, crocodiles stayed a little more competitive for a while. Okay? Amphibians, not so much. They were there at the beginning, but in the end, they ended up going the way that the mammals did, staying small, staying out of the way, like frogs are today. Okay? However, crocodiles, they did not give up the fight so easy. They shared many of the same niches and many of the same successful traits as their dinosaur cousins. There were some very large, alarming crocodiles during the Triassic and during the rest of the time of the dinosaurs. There are 40-foot crocodiles that we're going to talk about later today. Okay, but if you want to imagine a terrifying thing, a crocodile during the Triassic would have been less like a crocodile today, with the feet out here, just kind of like. That's kind of how crocodiles walk today. Crocodiles during the Triassic would have been the long, sleek body with that kind of crocodilian mouth, the jaw setup, but then up on their feet, kind of like dogs, and they were sprinters. they would chase you. Can you imagine if a crocodile just like stood itself up off the ground and started running at you faster than you could run away? Would that not be the most terrifying thing in your life? The only reason why I'm okay with crocodiles and alligators so much is because they stay right there. They can't really come after you unless you're dumb enough to get too close to the water. Not so with Triassic crocodiles. They would chase you down, right? So they stayed competitive with dinosaurs for a while. But in the end, dinosaurs won that as well. Why? Because while crocodilians were able to stand up and run, it was less energy efficient than the dinosaurs with the vertical legs. Remember how I talked about vertical leg placement before? Our legs are vertically under our bodies, not splayed out to the side, right? If I only ran like this, I wouldn't be able to run as far, as fast, or as long as I can since my legs are under me. And so dinosaurs had that advantage among a few others, but that was a huge one that put them over the crocodiles. Okay, some key facts. Dinosaurs are not the same thing as reptiles. Those two words are often used, not simultaneously, what's the word I'm looking for? Synonymously, okay? They're often used synonymously. While dinosaurs fit under the general umbrella of reptiles, reptilia, it's not the same thing, okay? They are a distinct subset. It is not synonymous. If we were talking about humans, if I were to reference something about humans, it would not reference all of mammalia, would it? Right. So let's start thinking about this a little bit different. Let's think about dinosaurs as not being just the same thing as every other reptile. They had a few distinct differences. For example, the fact that they had those vertical leg placements. Another, we think that they may have been to an extent endothermic, generating their own internal heat. Where those pelycosaurs before needed that giant sail to give them that advantage in warming up their blood, instead, there is some evidence to suggest that dinosaurs didn't need to sun themselves either. They may not have been able to maintain as high or as long a body temperature as we have. Perhaps it only kicked in after they had meals instead of like us where it is constant. We need that constant body temperature increase. But they had some form of endothermic metabolism result, okay? Big advantage. Very distinct from other reptiles, okay? We separate dinosaurs into two groups, Ornithschia and Saurischia, okay? So this has everything to do with their hip structure. Ornithschian, which means bird-hipped, tended to mostly be our herbivorous dinosaurs, okay? So here we have Ornithschia. Here we have Saurischia. Pretty much all Ornithschians were exclusively herbivorous. Pretty much all Saurischians, well, I can't say all. There was a split between Saurischian herbivores and carnivores, okay? Mostly herbivorous, pretty even split here. But here's the funny thing. Saurischian means lizard-hipped. Ornithschian means bird-hipped. The guy who found the first Ornithschian dinosaur said, that hip looks very similar to that of a bird. And so he called it an Ornithschian. It's actually Orniscosaurus or something like that. And then ever since then, every other dinosaur that was found with a similar hip structure has been classified as an Ornithschian dinosaur. Later on, someone else found Saurischian dinosaurs, which were called lizard-hipped. And yet it's ironic that their hips look far more like bird hips, which is why, notice up here, birds are in the Saurischian, aka lizard-hipped dinosaur group, instead of the bird-hipped group. Why? Because for so many years already, those had been called bird-hipped dinosaurs, and so it was too late. We already had this giant international classification system. And so, yes, birds, which we will talk about as being the descendants of dinosaurs, birds do reside in the lizard-hipped dinosaur category. It's great. All right, camera, you left me at some point. Stay with me here. Okay, birds in Saurischia. Very funny.
And what's the difference? Like one gives lay eggs and the other one.
No, they all lay eggs. The difference is in the hip structure. Within a Saurischian hip structure, it's very longitudinal across the body. The pubic bones are stretching across the body like this. Can you see that sort of banana shape there? Right? Whereas in a bird hip dinosaur, they're often splayed out to the side. Like, did you have a turkey for Thanksgiving? Did you look at the carcass at all? Did you see the way that the hip bones were structured? Kind of splayed out to the side, and then one bone that goes backwards towards the tail?
No, I didn't pay attention.
You didn't pay attention? Oh, well, what's the matter with you? Come on, man. You're telling me you didn't spend your Thanksgiving night picking through the bones of a turkey and making your aunt wonder why you're so weird? Totally not a real story. Yeah, so that's the difference. That's the big difference. I don't have, you know what I need to do? I need to 3D print these two hip structures and have them here for this lecture.
Should treat the thing like a T-Rex skeleton.
I have a T-Rex skull in the other room. It's like this. Here's a Diplodocus skull. I just repaired it like not long ago. Someone broke it. But I do have other skulls in that far room like that. All right. Pterosaurs are flying reptiles, not dinosaurs. You're having a hard time with this, Angel, aren't you?
No, these are dinosaurs.
Uh-huh. Yeah, right. They are not dinosaurs. For why? They lack those distinct dinosaurian hip structures. These diverged from the same common ancestor that dinosaurs came from, but far enough back that they do not share many of the same characteristics. They went another direction. What direction did they go? Up. That's why they were flying reptiles, okay? They got hollow bones like birds do today, okay? They had very, very small bodies. Even the largest flying reptile, which is Quetzalcoatlus, had the wingspan of the small airplane, would have weighed about the same as me, somewhere between 190 and 200 pounds, okay? A body that big weighing that little could only be true if the bones are hollow and there is minimal muscle requirements. Matter of fact, we don't even think that they even flapped their wings that much. For what we're pretty sure is that they were mostly gliders, and they probably lived most of the time near cliff sides where they could just dive off and glide to catch their prey and then catch a thermal to ride back up high. Minimal muscle movement so that they had as little weight as possible. Okay. At the end of the Triassic, there is, you guessed it, an extinction. Now, any competitors that dinosaurs were having a hard time with up to this point, the crocodilians, any other therapsid cousins, like this guy, which looks kind of like a crocodile, very similar, but was a therapsid, okay? This guy also looks very crocodilian. It's a crocodilian therapsid. That skull wouldn't look uncommon on a Spinosaurus or a large saltwater crocodile. Thank you. That came out of nowhere. All this competition died off, meaning that while the Triassic was the age when dinosaurs first showed up, after the Triassic ended is when dinosaurs really took off. And you'll see that here in the Jurassic. Only 100,000 years after all this competition went away, we see in the fossil record, dinosaurs have already taken over. They wasted no time. All it took was for those things to be gone, those little holdouts of competition to be gone, and they were there. They were doing it. Before we move on to the Jurassic, though, let's look at our geography. We still have Pangaea. It is slowly starting to break up, though. Check this out. Siberia and Europe is already starting that northward movement. there's only a little bit left here that's connecting them, right? Australia, Antarctica, Africa, South America, North America right here, right? Here we see the two orogenies that we mentioned happening at the end of the at the end of the Permian, okay? The Tethys Seaway, which is right here, this is the Tethys Ocean, is almost completely encompassed around by land. Land. There's an inlet here and an inlet here. This is what will become Indonesia eventually. So this is, for the most part, an enclosed, fairly calm, not shallow, but shallower than the rest of the ocean outside. This is where so much of our Triassic and Jurassic sea life took place. The Tethys, so many fossils come out of the rock that developed in the Tethys Ocean here. Okay, a lot of those marine reptiles come out of there. All right, any questions about the Triassic before we move on? Then let's go to the Jurassic. Now, the number one thing that people think of when I say Jurassic is Jurassic Park, right? Well, here is the hard fact about Jurassic Park. Most of the animals that you see in the Jurassic Park movies were not alive during the Jurassic. If anything, it should have been called Cretaceous Park because most of those animals, most of those dinosaurs lived during the third period of dinosaurs, the Cretaceous. But Cretaceous Park just doesn't have that same ring to it, I guess. So Michael Crichton wrote Jurassic Park. The Jurassic went from 201 to 145 million years ago. In the oceans, reefs are becoming huge. Hexacorals have become wildly successful. And our plankton have fully recovered from the extinction, the Permian extinction. And once they come back from this Triassic extinction that they experienced, we see the development of many modern varieties of planktons, such as dinoflagellates, which our oceans are full of today. We see a huge increase in the diversity of belemnoids. The Jurassic was very good for belemnoids. All of these here that you see pictured here, these are different sizes and shapes of those aragonite spikes that they grew inside of them. Some were stubby, some were long, some were bulbous, some were knife-shaped, but a huge variety in the belemnoids, each species having its own variety. Swimming reptiles. This is that terrifying picture of a plesiosaur I promised you, right? Giant, long, snake-like neck with needle-sharp teeth. That's not something you'd like to see out there scuba diving, right? The Jurassic was very good for the plesiosaurs. Many of those other swimming reptiles, the placoodonts, the nothosaurs, those die off. Plesiosaurs did very well. Ichthyosaurs did very well during the Jurassic. They were the two of the largest apex predators in the oceans at this time. As a result of the loss in the competition with the dinosaurs, crocodilians evolve to live out in the water. They lost the fight on land, and so they moved out into the water. And this is where we start to see crocodilians exclusively living in the water like we have today. Our plants are doing what they've always done, flourishing. Huge gymnosperms. Our lycopods are pretty much all gone at this point. Varieties of gymnosperms are what are left. Okay, those conifers up in the highlands and north and south latitudes, cycads, ginkgos, palms, things like that in the equatorial areas. What are the dinosaurs doing during the Jurassic? They're getting big. Not only big, they're getting armored. They're getting horns and spikes. They're getting all sorts of adaptations. The Jurassic was great for the dinosaurs. The largest land animals to ever exist lived during the Jurassic. Titanosaurs, which were these guys right here. The long-necked sauropods that you may have seen on Jurassic Park or animated shows or whatever. The largest group of sauropods were titanosaurs, 120 feet long, 80 feet tall, some of them, hundreds of tons. I've held a titanosaur egg before. It was the size of a beach ball. Big ol' egg, like that. There is lots of fascinating research into how long these things could live. Some people, there are groups of people that believe that titanosaurs started growing very quickly and rapidly reached maturity. And there are some that say, no, I mean, that doesn't really make sense for their metabolism. They must have lived for a very long time to get that big. We don't know yet. This research is ongoing. It's entirely possible that these things could have lived 80, 90 years to get that big. Whereas most reptiles today, I mean, okay, I can't say most. There are some reptiles that live for a very long time today, like Galapagos tortoise or sulcata tortoises can live for 150 years, right? Most reptiles don't live that long, right? Your standard gecko won't live that long. A well taken care of reptile of most species will live 20, 30 years tops. And so that's how we consider most dinosaurs to have lived as well. But these things could have lived for a lot longer because of their body size. Still working on that. But yeah, you get your Stegosaurus. You get your Allosaurus, which is the ancestor to, bless you, to Tyrannosaurs. Those show up in the Jurassic, okay? Wide variety of dinosaurs in the Jurassic time period. Mammals, they're doing okay, but they're still, staying in the background. They come out at night. They like to live underground or in trees, places to stay away from the dinosaurs. The first frogs show up in the Jurassic. The amphibians lost the competition with the reptiles a while back. But the first animals that we can identify as being frogs show up in the Jurassic. Also during the Jurassic, birds. Are there birds in the Jurassic? You ever heard of this little guy, Archaeopteryx? You ever heard that word, that name? That's Archaeopteryx right there. What does it look like to you?
A raven.
Oh, it looks like a raven. All right, Edgar Allan Poe. What? So it looks like a bird, right? Why does it look like a bird? Tell me what this thing has that makes you think it's a bird. Feathers are the first thing, isn't it? But what does it not have? A beak. It doesn't have beak. It has a mouth with teeth.
It has arms, like fingers.
Yeah, it's got fingers. Good. Those are very good observations. Okay. Archaeopteryx was, in fact, not a bird. It was a feathered dinosaur. While we believe that the first ancestral birds did show up in the Triassic or in the Jurassic, Archaeopteryx, we're pretty certain, was not an ancestral bird. It had far too many characteristics that would still define it as a dinosaur. So, some other feathered dinosaur developed bird-like characteristics in the Jurassic, but it was not Archaeopteryx, just a common ancestor with Archaeopteryx. Okay? It's very cool, though, because we know that birds, the first bird organisms must have been there in the Jurassic. Why? Because animals like Archaeopteryx occurred in the Jurassic. Feathers couldn't have evolved more than once. They're the same structures as they are today. The statistical likelihood that something as complex as feathers evolved twice in such a short period of time, inconceivably small. Therefore, logically speaking, birds must have evolved in the Jurassic because Archaeopteryx had feathers. Follow that logic? For that same reason, if you were to go to, let's just say you went online and you jumped on eBay and you typed in 1970 Tyrannosaurus Rex toy, or even 1980, or even 1990 Tyrannosaurus Rex toy, it would come up with a toy of a possibly intimidating looking, leathery skinned dinosaur, probably roaring, ah, right? But now, if you go on Amazon and you look up Tyrannosaurus Rex toy, you know what that toy is going to have on it? Feathers. Why, all of a sudden, in the last few decades, have we started putting feathers on our theropod dinosaurs, on our Velociraptor toys, on our Tyrannosaurus Rex toys? Why do those animals in the Jurassic World movies have feathers and the ones in the Jurassic Park movies from the 90s not have feathers?
They ruined it.
They ruined it? No. For this fact, if feathers developed that long ago in theropod dinosaurs, this is a theropod dinosaur, then it must be the case, and we have found fossils to support this, Velociraptor animals with feathers on them in the fossil record, that theropod dinosaurs later on also had feathers. Did T-Rex have feathers? We can't confirm that. We have found a few skeletons that have structures, fossil structures around the head to suggest that there may have been a tuft of some sort of proto-feather, sort of fuzzy stuff around on the neck of some tyrannosaurs, mostly in China, Chinese tyrannosaurs. But if it's true here, if there were theropods with fossils in the Jurassic, and now here in our modern world, we have theropod avian dinosaurs, aka birds. Technically, they are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs didn't all go extinct. Avian dinosaurs are still alive. They are birds, and they have fossils. The theropods in the middle must have had feathers, and that's why all of a sudden, in the last few decades, we started portraying them as such. I know it's hard to think of them like that. We all want that crazy, intimidating, scary Jurassic Park T-Rex to live in our minds. All right. In the Jurassic, Pangaea has fully started to break apart. Here we have Europe, Asia, moving off this way. North America has said, see ya, Gondwanaland, right? Africa and South America, there's this giant river system running between them now. Why? Because there is a divergent plate boundary there now, which that river sits on top of, and which is eventually going to become the South Atlantic Ocean. That's where the South Atlantic Ocean is going to be. This will be the North Atlantic Ocean, right? Antarctica and Australia are still connected to India, but they are breaking apart from the bottom of Africa down there. So Pangaea is just gone. It's gone. By mid-Jurassic, it's already broken apart. This is the late Jurassic image. They're already moving away from each other at this point, okay? The Nevadan orogeny occurred during the Jurassic. This was a Cordilleran orogeny, which, remember, affected the west coast of North America. Essentially, what happened here was island chain after island chain after island chain, pile up after pile up after pile up of sediment out here, got shoved by tectonics further and further towards the east, piling up more and more and more material on the west coast, extending the west coast of North America out into the Pacific Ocean and adding to the highlands that will eventually become the Rocky Mountain Plateaus. Okay. During the Jurassic, we see the development of the Morrison Formation. That's this darker orangish area out here, okay? This sediment was laid down during the Jurassic and is one of the most prolific fossil-rich formations on Earth. I've had the pleasure of doing multiple digs out in the Morrison Formation. Some of the coolest stuff I've ever found came out of the Morrison Formation. So many dinosaur and other animal fossils are in the Morrison Formation because the Jurassic was full of so much life and because the Morrison Formation was put down in a shallow sea environment that used to occupy the middle of North America. Speaking of which, this is what that inland ocean looked like. This is what North America would have looked like during the Cretaceous. This is during the Zuni Cratonic sequence, this inland seaway was present here in North America. Here you can see the effect of the Nevada orogeny, right, going on. And so this inland seaway existed and slowly got filled in with sediment coming off of this mountain range as the Nevada orogeny pushed further and further east. Sediment rolled off of that mountain range, filled in the seaway as time went on. Eventually, we're going to call this the Cretaceous Interior Seaway, which you'll see when I talk about the Cretaceous next. Okay, but the Morrison Formation was laid down during this time. Okay. Any questions about the Jurassic? All right. Well, then the Cretaceous, 145 to 66 million years ago. You may have learned it was 65 million years ago in grade school. We've adjusted it since those books that you had in grade school probably came out. So now we call it 66 million years ago. There was an extinction at the end of the Jurassic that it wasn't a big extinction, but it was enough to change the diversity of life to the point that it was noticeable. In particular, dinosaurian life. Dinosaurs did not come anywhere close to going extinct, but enough of them had to change as a result of this extinction that we see it's a noticeable change in the fossil record, and so we draw that line there between the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. Okay, our planktons, many of the modern families of planktons that we have in our oceans now show up during the Cretaceous. A lot of them are going to, well, I'll get to that in a minute. When we talk about the Cretaceous extinction, I'll talk about that. All right. The massive quantity of planktons in the ocean during the Cretaceous has never been replicated again on Earth. If you were to just take like a spoonful of Cretaceous seawater and drink it, it'd be like the nutritional value of soup. So many living things in the ocean at that time. Let me give you an example. Here we have the White Cliffs of England. Okay, famous, very large, very tall. I think I showed you a picture of this before, right? Lighthouse, like that tall on this cliffside, right? Lots and lots and lots. You know what that's made out of? You remember? Chalk. Good. What is chalk? Dead planktons, microorganisms. It takes a couple feet of dead microorganisms to get compressed into 1 foot of chalk. So when we're looking at this layer of chalk, we're not looking really at that many microorganisms. We're looking at a layer that thick of piled up plankton from the Cretaceous. Right there. And who knows how much of that layer has been weathered away. This layer really could have started up here, or up here, or up here, and then multiply that times 3. That's a lot of plankton in the ocean during the Cretaceous, right? Everywhere. Just because it's preserved here doesn't mean that it's not the case everywhere else during the Cretaceous, right? So, lots and lots of living things. Lots and lots of planktonic organisms. All right. We still have our ammonoids and our belemnoids. Surprise, surprise. They stuck around. Teleost fish. Teleost fish. Most of our fish that are alive today are what we consider to be teleost fish. That is, instead of just having an upper jaw that hinges like this, they are also able to have some movement on their, or excuse me, a lower jaw that moves. They also have an upper jaw. Their upper jaw can move a little bit as well. So when you look at a fish jaw, they're not just doing this, they're doing this to an extent, okay? And then also symmetrical tails. Those are the two big things that allow us to differentiate between teleost and non-teleost fish. So they show up in the Cretaceous, and we still have them today. We see the development of a brand new swimming reptile apex predator, the pliosaur, okay? Also known as mosasaurs. Most of them are mosasaurs. The ones that you are most likely familiar with are called mosasaurs. So we still have our plesiosaurs, the long-necked ones. We still have our ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs are struggling / gone. Turtles got really big. Those really big turtles that we talked about, those were during the Cretaceous. Mosasaurs, though, these were huge. Leopleurodon. You ever heard of Leopleurodon? Okay. Leopleurodon, this is, I believe, supposed to be a representation of Leopleurodon. They got really big, 60-foot long, giant, carnivorous reptiles, occupying the space that modern-day whales have, but way more vicious. You ever seen or heard of the story of Moby Dick? Giant sperm whale that hunts down ships and destroys them, eats the sailors, right? Think about that, but all over the oceans, right? They occupied that niche, but probably far more aggressive. Moby Dick was a cautionary tale, a fiction. I have no doubt that sperm whales have taken out ships before. For the most part, they tend to stay to themselves. Mosasaurs, though, gigantic, vicious hunters. Oh, Jurassic World. Y'all have seen Jurassic World, right? The first one? You remember the swimming reptile that comes up out of the pool and eats the shark? That's a mosasaur, one of these. They show up in the Cretaceous. I have some of their teeth. I've got a couple right here. These are mosasaur teeth. Huh? Smaller? Oh, well, this isn't from a 60-footer. No, this is probably from more like a 12 to 14-footer.
Is that real?
Yeah, these are real. I have a couple individual ones over here I can actually pass around. These are from a slightly larger one, probably a 16 to 18-footer. Show it to the camera first. Mosasaur teeth. Huh? That's a good question. Things like growth rates and all of that are very difficult to tell unless you do like a cross-section of bone. And then even then, if you do a cross-section of a really well-preserved bone, who's to say that over millions of years, the way that we understand bone growth occurs the same way as it did then? There's a lot of room for interpretation and for evolutionary uncertainty. So we can make the best estimations that we can, but I'm not familiar enough with current studies on mosasaurs to be able to tell you if anyone has done a reliable study on how fast they grow or not. All right. It is during the Cretaceous that we see a big turnover between the niche occupiers of brachiopods and bivalves. For this entire time, up until the Jurassic extinction, brachiopods have kind of had the top seat in this niche. Bivalves, still tons of bivalves, right? But brachiopods have been the most popular until now. Thanks to the Jurassic extinction, there was something about the Jurassic extinction that brachiopods just could not handle. So bivalves recovered faster. Bivalves began occupying those niches more. And now, as a result, today in our oceans, there are far more bivalves than there are brachiopods. We do still have brachiopods, but when you go out there and you look at what occupies these niches, you're going to find oysters, you're going to find clams, you're going to find scallops. These are bivalves. Okay. Crabs, modern day crustaceans, crabs, lobsters, etc. We start to see them in the fossil record in the Cretaceous. Rudists, which are a type of bivalve, and only occur during the Cretaceous. They were one example of how bivalves became very successful. There are entire reef systems made out of these rudest bivalves during the Cretaceous. But then at the end of the Cretaceous, they go extinct. They were only alive during the Cretaceous. They made massive reef systems, and then boop, they were gone.
Do they like define like separated them every time there's an extinction?
Yeah, we do that through stratigraphy. You remember our stratigraphy exercise? We separate periods of time based upon mostly biological events. And extinctions are fantastic biological events to discriminate time with. So why is there a line between the Jurassic and the Cretaceous? Because there was an extinction event there. Why is there a line between the Permian and the Triassic? Because there's an extinction event there, so on and so forth. Okay. So because we see the development of things like these massive rudest colonies, and then all of a sudden, whoop, they're gone, that's one reason why we would draw a line. Extinctions. All right, a new aspect of the arms race appears during this time. Piercing shells. Up until this point, most of the time, you would simply crush your prey's shell to get out the yummy stuff on the inside. Instead, now, things like starfish develop the ability to drill through. There are snails that have the ability to drill through shells. Using a little spike and a muscle, they just slowly drill their way through the shell, stick their tongue in there, and then slurp up the yummy stuff on the inside. The plants. A huge change occurs in plants during the Cretaceous. We finally see angiosperms. Remind me what an angiosperm is. The seed is enclosed in what?
A fruit.
A fruit, which comes from a, yes, a tree, but flower. Angiosperms, you can typically think of angiosperms as flowering plants. Let's talk a little bit about their cycle here. Previous to this, gymnosperms, pollen would fly through the air from a gymnosperm, land on a particular organ on another gymnosperm, grow a cone, and within that cone, you would have seeds. With an angiosperm, they develop these specialized leaf organs, which we call flowers. Those flowers would both release sperm and catch sperm, or the pollen, which is the sperm for trees. It would fly through the air, be caught by a flower, and then get the growth of a seed going. However, angiosperms come with a couple of unique traits. First of all, that unique organ that we call a flower, but also fruit. Double fertilization. I mentioned this before, right? Let's talk about it again. What is double fertilization? Well, that pollen that's absorbed by that flower is going to start the growth of a fruit. That first pollination starts a fruit growing, and inside of that fruit is the second pollination effect, a seed. Think about an apple. The apple is essentially a whole bunch of tissue surrounding and protecting the seeds on the inside. That fruit starts to grow first, and then the seeds inside of it. When that apple falls to the ground, the tissue gradually rots away, but only after having given that first nutritional boost that those seeds need to get started in life. Double fertilization through angiosperm, as a result of the evolution of angiosperms, I should say, was a huge advantage. And so we do not see this until the Cretaceous. There were no flowers until the Cretaceous. There was no fruit until the Cretaceous. Okay? Whatever you think of when you imagine a forest in the Jurassic, it is missing those things. Okay? So now that we have this creates a huge change. Not only in the world of plants, but also in the world of animals. These are totally different parts of the food chain that are now there. And by the way, this also has a huge effect on insects. Why would this have a huge effect on insects?
They feed on food.
Well, yeah, they could eat the fruit, but before that, before there's even fruit to begin with. Let's say that I'm an insect that likes to perhaps eat the pollen of plants. And now, or perhaps I prey on an insect, right? That eats those, another insect that eats the pollen. Or maybe I'm like a bee. I collect that pollen and I make something like honey out of it, right? Well, if all of a sudden,
they spread the pollen.
Yeah. If all of a sudden there's a mutation in a tree that causes the development of a new organ, like a flower, a specialized form of leaf. This specialized form of leaf, maybe it makes more pollen. Maybe it's a fun color. Maybe I'm an insect that's drawn to one wavelength of color over another. Did you guys know that bees, because of the nature of their eyes, are drawn to the wavelength of yellow more than any other color? If you know someone with blonde hair and they always get bees buzzing around them, that's probably why. They prefer the color yellow to other colors, so they are drawn to that color more. Perhaps I'm an insect that's drawn to the color blue. So all of a sudden, if there's a random mutation that causes a blue pigment to appear in this particular leaf, I'm going to attract a lot more insects. The more insects that come to visit my leaf take more pollen to other plants. The more that pollen goes to other plants, guess what? The more seeds are going to get pollinated with that gene for those blue leaves. And the more it spreads around, the more future generations have that. My flowers start to develop time over time. And so I get all of this variety of plants that now have these specialized leaf organs that we call flowers that are all over the world. Some are blue, some are green, some are yellow, some are pink. All of them are genetic varieties based upon some positive mutation that occurred a long time ago, unless they're ones that we've altered since. Gymnosperms typically take about 18 months from fertilization to successful seed growth. Angiosperms, 2 to 3 weeks. You put an apple seed in the ground and it gets the water it needs, it'll start to grow in a couple of weeks. Pine trees take longer. That's a huge advantage, and that is why angiosperms spread everywhere real quick. Okay, massive advantage. Side note, flowers have all sorts of different colors. What color are the other parts of the plants? What color are plant leaves? They're almost exclusively what? Green. Why? Why green?
The most efficient color that absorbs the light.
That's the color they don't reflect.
Okay, so you're thinking about this backwards. You said the most efficient color that absorbs light. Think about it the other way around. What reflects what?
They don't have
The sun reflects the sun's green light. It's every color but green.
Bingo. The plant is absorbing every wavelength of light except green. Why green? I don't know. Our plants tend to absorb high and low wavelengths of light. The red spectrum and the purple-blue spectrum, high and low. Why green is the one that's excluded? It's an evolutionary fluke, maybe? It's entirely possible that some planet somewhere else has developed an organism like a plant that photosynthesizes, that excludes that absorbs everything except red. And therefore there will be red plants, or purple, and therefore there will be purple plants. It's very possible that there could be black plants. Under what circumstance would there be black plants? It absorbs all wavelengths of light. All of these are theoretically possible. It's just for some reason, a long time ago, those first photosynthesizing organisms, from which all plants share that common ancestor, absorbed everything but green. And now here we are today. All right. Let's talk about Cretaceous dinosaurs. This is where you get your stuff like T-Rex, like Triceratops, okay? Parasaurolophus, and other hadrosaurs like these guys. All these dinosaurs that we saw in Jurassic Park lived during the Cretaceous. Velociraptors, Pachycephalosaurus, okay? It's actually very similar. It's very interesting to see, to interpret the interactions between these organisms in the fossil record, because it's very close to what we observe in African fauna today. You have your apex predators, like the lions, like tyrannosaurs. You have your herds of large grazing animals, like Parasaurolophus or Triceratops, kind of filling in that space for rhinos or for water buffalo. You have your herds of larger sauropods, kind of similar to, although there are not many of those that are left, very similar to elephants, right? So the interactions and the different social groups and the ways that they hunt each other and all of that, very similar in many ways to African fauna today. Studying one helps to study the other. This is also where we have those huge crocodiles I promised you, right? This is an image of, or artist rendition of Deinosuchus, a 40-foot long crocodile that, yes, probably chomped down on tyrannosaurs every now and then. It was that big. This is a skull of Suchomimus compared to a saltwater crocodile, which is the largest species of crocodile we have on Earth today. This is a saltwater crocodile skull compared to Suchomimus. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said thank God they're dead. Yeah, fair enough. No, going for a swim in the lake would mean something different if these things were out and about still, right? No one would live in Louisiana. I would hope not, anyway. All right. Our flying reptiles. The largest flying reptile that ever lived, Quetzalcoatlus. 35-foot wingspan, tip to tip, right? 35 feet. That was alive during the Cretaceous. This is a Quetzalcoatlus. Notice they have this huge crest on their head. Why would they have a big old crest on their head?
Temperature control?
Probably not temperature control. Why would you control temperature through a crest on your head when you have these gigantic wings, right? That are also already probably doing that. Huh?
To put wind under the wings,
Okay, what about wind?
like it splits it and then like it goes under.
Hey, okay. You got there faster than most classes typically do. It was probably for ornamentation to an extent, right? Perhaps for mating purposes, perhaps for intimidation. Bless you. But when you have a body that small, that has to weigh very little, you really don't have a whole lot of weight or body size to play around with. You have to maintain that delicate balance. Everything on your body must fulfill a function for you to be a successful organism. So while it may have been for ornamentation, we strongly suspect that it also had something to do with perhaps flight stability. Perhaps working something like a hydrofoil or something, like an air rudder, so to speak, right? Where if you're out there gliding, right, and you've got this big old crest on your head, perhaps the direction you turn your head turns your body, because that it's acting like a weather vane, kind of directing where your gliding body goes. And that would work out just fine if you have eyes on both sides of your body that can kind of like keep an eye on things and like, oh, there's something down there, right? We strongly suspect that was one reason for why it had that. All right, mammals. Still small, still mostly resembling rodents, right? Rodents hadn't come about yet, but very similar to rodents, okay? It is during the Cretaceous that we see a divergence, though, between placentals and marsupials. Remind me what a marsupial is?
Yeah, pouches.
Yes, okay. They give birth to undeveloped young. Those young finish their development outside of the body, inside of a pouch, like kangaroos, wombats, etc. Okay. Now, at the end of the Cretaceous is a giant extinction. What caused this extinction? The impact of an asteroid, right? The Chicxulub crater off the coast of Yucatan, Mexico, right here. This is a gravity map of the Chicxulub crater under the ocean there. An asteroid approximately the size of Long Island, New York, hit there. Yeah, it was big. And created a massive tsunami. That tsunami swept across a whole bunch of North America, all of whatever land was down here at this time, what crossed the ocean, swept away a whole bunch of life there. And whatever didn't die in the massive tsunamis had to live through what essentially became a winter because the cloud of ash and dust that got blown into the atmosphere by this impact blocked out the sun for at least a couple of years, throwing the Earth into a mini ice age, which killed off a lot of plants, which killed off a bunch of herbivores, which killed off a lot of the food chain, and so most of the predators died. It collapsed the food chain. Dinosaurs did not survive, with the exception of the avian dinosaurs, which remained as birds. Geographically speaking, Pangaea, fully broken apart by the end of the Cretaceous. Okay, so we get a big old impact, boom, right there out in the ocean. Dust cloud, extinction. Africa and South America have separated from each other. We still have this seaway running through here during the Cretaceous, that Cretaceous interior seaway right there. Eurasia and China and the rest of Asia are out here. Australia is just barely saying goodbye to Antarctica. Where's Antarctica going? Down south. And there it will stay. Has not moved since then. Okay. India, separated from Antarctica, and is on its way out. Madagascar, it is a common misconception that Madagascar separated from Africa. It did not. Actually, so Madagascar and India were one unit with Antarctica and Australia. Separated from Africa. Then India separated from Antarctica. Then Madagascar separated from India and stayed down there by Africa. It never actually broke off from Africa. It broke off from India. Okay. All right, so during the Cretaceous, it was hot for most of the time. At the end, though, it got pretty cold. Why would it get pretty cold? Yeah, the ash in the atmosphere threw us into an ice age, and that's what contributed to a whole bunch of the extinctions that happened there, right? Because it was so warm for most of the Cretaceous, this led to anoxic conditions in the deeper water environments. What does anoxic conditions lead to? Black shales. Why? Because that organic content doesn't break down because there isn't enough oxygen present to break it down. So you get a whole bunch of organic material that gets preserved at the bottom of your water. That organic material eventually gets cooked, and that's what becomes oils. There is a lot of Jurassic and Cretaceous oil and natural gas out there in the world. That's a huge target. During the Cretaceous was the severe orogeny, S-E-V-I-E-R, Cordilleran, west coast, obviously, adding again to the development of the high mountain ranges and plateaus in North America, got piled on top of the Jurassic Nevadan orogeny. Okay. And then here's the development and end of our Cretaceous interior seaway. It used to fill this entire area, and then as time went on, moving into the end of the Cretaceous, it filled in for all the sediment coming in off of these mountain ranges, right? The Nevadan orogeny, then the severe orogeny. All of these mountain building events dumping sediment as it weathered off the mountain ranges out here into the sea, Our Cretaceous interior seaway gradually closed off and became what we call the Maori Sea, and then completely closed off entirely, leaving this area landlocked into the North America that we know and love today. It is during this time that the Grand Canyon was formed as well. Why was the Grand Canyon formed? Well, we believe that a piece of the plate that got shoved underneath of North America by the Pacific Plate, we call it the Farallon Plate. We believe that a piece of it detached, floated up, not floated, but was more buoyant because it's continental material, more buoyant, and so it pushed its way back up underneath North America, uplifted a chunk of North America, and the Colorado River, which was running through it at that point, carved its way back down to sea level, which is why we have the Grand Canyon today, right? And then all of this chalk that I talked about was deposited out here. Here's England. Here's the coastline where those massive chalk deposits are exposed. But this entire area was covered in all that chalk. Most of it is underground. In that England area, we can see it exposed at the surface. Most of it's either gone or underground at this point.
So there's a lot of oil in there?
Well, the chalk doesn't make oil, but chalk does make a fantastic cap for oil. So if you have a chalk deposit on top of oil-rich rock, the oil can't escape through the chalk, and so it'll just kind of stay there. In the same way that salt works. Salt, chalk, other evaporites like gypsum, those work great as cap rock for oil deposits. All right, any questions about the Cretaceous? All right, well then that's it for the lecture. Remember that we have our last lecture the next time we meet, and then our exam review after that. But I will be opening the lab exam after the next lecture.